All right, what's going on there, fellas? We are back at it with the trend of reactivating the old YouTube. I figured a good way to do that was just to be doing the old single topic videos a little bit more often, right? Lifting weights is my hobby. Coaching lifting weights is my job. It's what I'm educated in, and it's what I talk about with my best friends, Kirsten and Max, right? It is my day. I have a lot of opinions. It means a lot to me that I have a captive audience that is interested in my opinions, just hearing my perspective on certain things related to lifting weights. It means the world to me that I have a bunch of people that know what they're doing, that want to hear at least my take on a lot of lifting related shit, and it doesn't require a lot of prep. So I figured that's something I can keep active on the channel to give you handsome chads something to watch while you eat your meals or while you do your cardio, while you go out on your walks to get your step count in, to allow you to recover for the immense tonnages you plan on lifting. So I like watching YouTube videos while I eat. I like just keeping occupied, and if I can learn a thing or two or at least get a different perspective while I do, it's always a plus for me. I've got a bunch of channels that I like to watch while I eat. I figured why not give my best shot at making something similar for y'all. So today's topic comes from a gentleman in my Instagram DMs who sent me a question asking about my thoughts on the use of regular conventional deadlifts for bodybuilding only goals. Not two goals at the same time. We're not trying to power build. We're not caring about our strength and how we look, purely physique related outcomes, my thoughts on deadlifting. And I gave him some of the thoughts that I'm about to give you guys, and he absolutely cooked me in the reply, which I thought was pretty funny. And he was like, well, yeah, but Eric Bugenhagen says that they're really good and he dwarfs you. Well, yeah, I think I deadlift more than Boogs does by a pretty substantial amount. And as you said, he dwarfs me. So I doubt that's the difference between him and I, but I thought that was funny to get asked my thoughts on this and then just to get absolutely fucking clapped with the response. So we're going to talk about vanilla conventional deadlifts. We're also going to touch on deadlift variations and their utility for bodybuilding, just as I see it. You can probably tell from looking at me, I'm not a bodybuilder. Physique outcomes are not really my goal. I'd prefer to look strong and be strong, but the aesthetics of the physique, not really my area of expertise, though hypertrophy is a massive part of getting stronger. And I've got quite a few thoughts as someone who's done a lot of lifting, eaten a lot of protein, and put on a reasonable amount of muscle across my training career. So when we kind of get into this discussion of deadlifts for bodybuilding training, the talking point that will come up relatively quickly is talking about like axial fatigue and the SFR of conventional deadlifts, right? SFR being stimulus to fatigue ratio. So how much they stimulate a muscle growth response, but also how fatiguing they are per kind of unit of stimulus, right? That's a made up thing, but it's a concept that we can use to kind of hone in our training. Ideal exercise selection is something that's not all that fatiguing, but has a similarly high stimulus per set. And while conventional deadlifts certainly must pose a pretty significant growth stimulus, they also pose a pretty uniquely high fatigue. Part of that's being the heavy axial loading component. When we kind of fatigue those muscles surrounding our spine, it kind of nukes our force output kind of across our whole body. So it ends up being a very fatiguing endeavor, even though it is very stimulative. And that would kind of have a lot of people weighing their costs and benefits and maybe favoring away from it. Now, that being said, I don't think that matters all that much until you're later into your training career, you're a little bit more advanced and you're a little bit stronger. Let me tell you why, right? As we train, one of the responses we have is we increase our motor unit recruitment, right? So an advanced lifter has more muscle, but they're also able to call upon a greater percentage of their muscle. And this is one of the reasons why a set-to-set basis, sure, 80% for 10 and 80% for 10 is the same if we talk in relative intensity, but the guy who's lifting more absolute weight tends to have a little bit more fatigue, a slower recovery curve. Part of that's being a bigger guy, but there's also greater amounts of fatigue that come with greater amounts of weight lifted. And that will govern a lot of the training differences we see when guys get bigger and stronger and why that works best for them, but it would not work well at all for you. Yes, they're genetic freaks, but there's also kind of recovery constraints where it's like the top end deadlifters usually deadlift every other week heavy. Some of them stick to once a week, but it's not the twice a week that many trainees can handle early in their training career. It's the same percentage, right? So the relative intensity is the same, the absolute intensity changes. In a bodybuilding context, one of the other reasons for this is usually we end sets at like roughly technical failure, right? The better you get at doing a given isolation or compound lift for hypertrophy, the more technical failure becomes synonymous with muscular failure. We close those two things together and together. So between those two things, bigger, stronger, more advanced athletes can usually get more out of their body in a given set. And that's why a lot of the time, right, we say, oh, volume's the primary driver of hypertrophy. And it's like, what does primary driver even mean? We have an amalgam of a couple of variables that we think produce a good workout or a good progression over time. But if volume was, like, number of sets per week was the primary driver, which in the short term it absolutely can be, right? Increase your number of sets per week, we will grow. But we'd expect as athletes get more and more advanced, their number of sets per week would just go up and up and up and up. So the most advanced athletes would be handling the most number of sets per week. And that's very much not what we see, both on the natty side and on the unnatty side. A lot of the time that volume comes down as the lifter is able to create a greater magnitude of stimulus and a greater magnitude of fatigue with individual sets. Oftentimes the number of sets will actually climb downward, which I don't really have strong feelings because I don't understand the point of the discussion. But if we were to kind of observe that as we get more advanced, volume comes down. Well, what is it that rises to allow us to continue getting more advanced? Well, it's probably some combination of being able to tax the muscle more on a given set. So being good at bodybuilding form is being professionally inefficient, right? Being good at strength training form is being very efficient, right? We're trying to split the task across as many muscles as we can when we're strength training, and we are trying to make it as difficult as possible for select target muscles and almost be deliberately inefficient when we're bodybuilding. So getting better at that, and also the load tends to rise. So you could have like an interesting argument of like, well, maybe mechanical tension is probably better phrased as the primary driver, and volume just has to reach a sufficient level. Now, that's an unbelievably annoying and long-winded way to get to what I wanted to get to, which is most people are at the point where they're not neurally efficient, and the set ends pretty far from true muscular failure because technical failure happens early. I think you could make a really good argument that you almost want to lean into those things that are very fatiguing and also very stimulative. Those same things that were warned, oh, the SFR, those are pretty fatiguing. The things that are pretty fatiguing also tend to come with a pretty reasonably good stimulus a lot of the time, if they sound even remotely like a good idea for bodybuilding. And I think you could make a really good argument for early in a trainee's career, picking those heavier, more taxing motions, because it's going to be hard for them to over-fatigue themselves initially. Can it be done? Absolutely. I did it. Lots of guys who are motivated did it. But that being said, like this hyper concern about overtraining or over-accumulating fatigue, you want to toe that line to know where it is. And a lot of the time it's a lot further than early trainees who are very well educated think it is, right? So leaning into more fatiguing movements often, I think, yields slightly better results, if anything, for early trainees. But that being said, once we get into our training a little bit deeper, yes, compounds are good because they split demands across our body, and they're very efficient on a set-for-set basis on putting muscle onto our frame. Maybe there's an argument to be made, younger lifters should lean into compounds. Maybe there isn't. I don't really give a shit about that. But a lot of the time we do an exercise and we are trying to pick what our rate limiter is, because the rate limiter is what's going to grow the most effectively, right? So it's like, hypothetically, if my biceps fail first on a lat pull down, that's more a bicep exercise than it is a lat exercise, because what determines the proximity to failure is usually going to be called the target muscle. And it's like you can select different exercises that I think are very effective for growing different body parts, right? Will the deadlift grow your hamstrings? Abso-freaking-lutely, right? It's not as though things that are a slight deviation away from optimal don't work, right? And that's why, like the whole discussion of like Boogs doesn't give a shit about optimal. He just goes hard. Yes, because all these exercises work. We're trying to eke out little percentages if we care to, but if we enjoy our training more another way, cool, no fucking problem at all. Does not matter. So will the deadlift grow your hamstrings? Yes, absolutely. But if the goal was growing the hamstrings, I would definitely favor towards like an RDL or a stiff leg, where we keep the knee a little bit stiffer. We don't have that like biarticular shortening at one end, lengthening at the other, making it a little bit less effective, getting a little bit less stretch on the hamstring. Those would just be more effective on a set-to-set basis, but it's not to say the conventional deadlift doesn't work. Traps. Will deadlifting grow your traps? Abso-freaking-lutely. Will it grow your traps as much on a set-to-set basis as doing maybe heavy shrugs? Probably not. So if we were saying, well, I deadlift for traps, maybe something better could be done there. I deadlift for hamstrings, maybe it could be altered a little bit to get a little bit more. But that being said, if you said my hole in my physique is my erectors, I really rate conventional deadlifts above everything. People will say, well, hypothetically, if we load up like a Jefferson curl and gradually overload that with time, that would be like the best option. Or let's say we do a flexion extension row where we're taking our spine through a big amount of flexion extension, so we're getting a good effective range of motion for the erectors. I don't think those hold a candle to conventional deadlifts dead stop from the floor for putting mass on the erectors. That's something I think they do uniquely well. So if you find a hole in your physique that your erectors are underdeveloped and you really want to attack it, there's probably nothing I rate above conventional deadlifts. But that being said, if our goal is hamstrings, I might pick the RDL or the stiff leg. And generally guys that are going hard and progressing RDLs and stiff legs still get enough erector that it's not a weak point in their physique. But I guess that kind of is the crux of my selection. It's like, hey, I wouldn't worry about this from an SFR perspective unless you're pretty deep into this. But if we're talking about bodybuilding, it depends what we're trying to get out of it. If we're trying to get hamstrings, I would stiffen your legs. If we're trying to get glutes, there's probably a couple other exercises I would pick before that. If we're trying to get traps, or if we're trying to get lats, I wouldn't say it's anywhere near my top pick for lats, right? And people will say, oh, but big deadlifters have big lats. Well, is it that the deadlift built big lats, or is it that they did a bunch of other back work to support their quest for a big deadlift that built the big back, right? There's a causation argument there. Man, this has been rambly and shit. I hope you guys like it. But yeah, if the goal is erectors, I rate conventional deadlifts really highly. But if you don't think that's a weak point in your physique, maybe that time could be better spent.